Hey guys, my name is Max Jacobson. You're watching Lions Fantasy. Today we're going to review some things that happened on this past Sunday and what it means for fantasy football. We're going to go over some must starts for this week and waiver wire pickups that could potentially help you win your next week if you have somebody on bye. The first portion of our video is going to be us going over reactions to specific games, specific players, or anything that happened on Sunday that might be valuable to you and your fantasy football team. The first player we're going over today though is TAGOVAILOA, and honestly, no matter how bad he was on this past Sunday, as long as he keeps throwing the ball to WADDLE and MCKISSIC, we're going to be happy. They're not must-start players moving forward, but you can definitely feel more comfortable with them, playing them on your team, with Tua playing behind center instead of Jacoby Brissett moving forward. This Vikings-Panthers game we saw on Sunday was an absolute banger of a game, and honestly, Justin Jefferson really cemented himself this week as a true elite receiver, but his stat line didn't quite really show that. Jefferson had a 50-yard plus touchdown that was overthrown by Kirk Cousins. Jonathan Taylor is that guy. And he's clearly going to perform to an elite level running back, an RB1 all year, despite having subpar volume in this offense. In his last 12 games, he's averaging 21.5 PPR fantasy points. And in that stretch, he has more points than Zeke, James Robinson, and Nick Chubb had all of last year. Jonathan Taylor has the Niners in Week 7, who since Saleh's departure to New York have been average, allowing the 15th most rushing yards per game and the 7th least passing yards allowed per game, which theoretically should allow Jonathan Taylor to be in positive game script, especially if the Colts look to move Marlon Mack at some point during this week. New York fans have it tough right now, I'm not going to lie. The Jets are absolutely atrocious, and the Giants might be just as bad. This Giants offense with Saquon Barkley and Kenny Golladay hurt looks horrible. We can give them the benefit of the doubt because they played a tough Rams defense in Week 6, but it doesn't look promising for Daniel Jones and the Giants moving forward. We'll have to keep a little monitor and keep up to date on Kadarius Toney's ankle injury, which he suffered at the beginning of the first quarter. But he was looking pretty elite to that point, I will say that. He had 3 receptions for 36 yards on the first drive, and he left with plenty of time left in the first quarter. This guy's looking like one of the biggest steals in all of fantasy this year so far, and it's Brandin Cooks. 6 weeks in, and he's top 5 in target share. He's had 2 weeks already of being a top 12 wide receiver, or a wide receiver 1. This offense is bad, though. So if you can package him with another player who's been outperforming their ADP, or how truly talented they are, like a Marvin Jones Jr. or a Marquise Brown, and go and get a guy like Calvin Ridley, who's also disappointed, or a guy like Stephon Diggs, somehow, some way, and package 2 of those guys for a more consistent elite option, then you are 100% going to dub that trade. And I would advise that you guys definitely go out and make that play. This guy's also been one of the biggest steals in fantasy drafts so far this year. And if you got him in the late second or early third, you're probably feeling great about your RB1. And despite getting destroyed by the Bengals this week, DeAndre Swift was able to maintain fantasy relevance. This is amazing for dynasty and redraft owners to see and hear. Swift somehow managed to produce 17.7 PPR fantasy points while only having 13 rushes for 24 yards. Swift's bread and butter doesn't come in the rushing game though, it comes in the receiving game, and so far this year he's averaging 5.6 receptions a game for 49 yards. This gives him an extremely safe PPR floor, and if he sees the end zone, he's a top play of the week. This one hurts me to say, but I think we're at this point now where I've watched Antonio Gibson the entire year. This offense is awful, and he continues to battle injuries that are only going to get worse. So I'm officially out on him, and I think you should sell him at all costs if you can. A player that had so much hype going into the season is doing the exact opposite of what we thought he would do. J.D. McKissic was the RB12 on the week in PPR formats with 19 fantasy points. This is not a good sign for Antonio Gibson owners, who might see their RB1 or RB2 head to IR potentially with that shin injury that's been bothering him all year. Like I said, I would sell him at all costs right now because his injury is only going to get worse. This Cowboys-Pats game was just phenomenal to watch, and it was such a good game. But we saw that Amari Cooper just isn't the wide receiver that we thought he would be this year. But CeeDee Lamb is the real deal. I think he's going to be the wide receiver 1 in this offense, and he's the wide receiver 1 on this week. Oh, and for the Patriots, the only player you should feel comfortable starting every single week is Damian Harris. If you have Hunter Henry, you can maybe rely on him to be somewhat of a reliable tight end, but I'd look to trade him high. Noah Fant looks good, guys. I know it's weird to say, but he does look good. He's on pace for around 8 to 11 touchdowns this year, as long as he can stay healthy, which, granted, he hasn't been able to stay healthy his entire career. As long as he can this year, he's locked in for a top 8 tight end season. This Sunday night game was phenomenal to watch, but it was painful for owners of Chris Carson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett to watch, in my opinion. Alex Collins, Chris Carson's backup, just rushed for over 100 yards and a touchdown against one of, if not the best D-line in all of football. Chris Carson has been an injury-prone player his entire career and hasn't been able to manage a full workload. When he comes back, I wouldn't be surprised if they use a Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb kind of situation, where they split carries 60-40. This is not good for Chris Carson owners. It's clear in this offense with Geno Smith behind center that he isn't going to lean on a safe blanket either. A lot of backup quarterbacks tend to do that, but Geno's not going to. Lockett saw 7 targets, which is good, but it only led to 2 receptions. They don't have the same chemistry that him and Russell Wilson had, so that deep ball is going to miss consistently. As for DK Metcalf, he had 7 targets, which is good. It led to 6 receptions and 58 yards. He didn't see the end zone though, but I don't see him really popping off as a top tier wide receiver moving forward either. Geno Smith hurts the value of this team pretty much in all areas, and it's not looking good moving forward. All right, now we're going to move on. We're going to a portion of the video. We're going to talk about players that you have to start in week 7. Must starts for week 7. Players that are going to win you their matchup, might even be top 5 of their position this week. Our first start of the week is someone who's really been somewhat of a disappointment this year, to be honest. Going into this season, he was regarded as the overall wide receiver 1 and had the most upside out of anybody being picked in the first 3 rounds. And it's Calvin Ridley. This week, he has an insanely good matchup against the Miami Dolphins, who are giving up the 4th most passing yards a game, all while giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to opposing wide receivers in PPR formats. And I expect him to absolutely have a bounce back game and eat this week against this awful Miami defense. My next must start is Jonathan Taylor. We already talked about in this video, but he's an absolutely elite running back at this point. 5 touchdowns in the past 3 weeks. With the news of Kareem Hunt possibly missing significant time, I wouldn't be surprised if Marlon Mack is traded to the Browns very soon here. And once Marlon Mack is traded, Jonathan Taylor is locked in as a top 3 play every single week. So of course, Jonathan Taylor is my next must start. And this one kind of goes without saying, but my final must start of the week is Jamar Chase. A player who everybody deemed would be a bust because of a couple preseason games where he had some drops, which is ridiculous to look back at now. But he could explode any given week with a multi-touchdown game. With how Burrow is targeting him, he legitimately could be a top 10 wide receiver this year, if not top 5 if he starts picking up even more steam. He's a generational talent at wide receiver, and anyone who doubted his hands during preseason is definitely looking a little bit suspect about now, and he's my must start going into week 7. That was it for our must start portion of this video. Now we're going to move on to some waiver wire ads and some players that I'm looking to grab in every one of my leagues if I'm given the opportunity. Our first waiver wire pickup of the week is Zach Ertz. And I'm not a huge believer in Zach Ertz, to be honest. I don't know if he can produce to the same level he has in the years past, but we can't forget and we can't ignore the fact that he's joining the best offense in football. There is some concern with Ertz to the Cardinals because he's joining a team that targeted the tight end position the least amount in the entire NFL to this point. But since the tight end position is so scarce, he's still worth it. If you're desperate for a tight end with Gronk or Logan Thomas out, I would look to spend about 10 to 15% of your fab money on Zach Ertz this week. Otherwise, no more than 7%. Our second waiver wire pickup of the week is Alex Collins, who did have an injury at the end of last game, which is important to note. But if it was something serious, we would have already heard something about it. So I'm going to expect him to play next week. He needs to be picked up, though, if he already wasn't in your league. He just went for 100 yards and a touchdown against the best D-line in football in the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's easily going to be a top 36 running back moving forward and could easily fill some bye week slots that you might have. If you have Chris Carson, you should have already had him. If you don't have Chris Carson, you can grab him and try to trade him to the Chris Carson owner and try to finesse him in any way. I would also look to do that. Our third waiver wire out of the week is KHALIL Herbert, running back from the Bears. And honestly, he's another running back that their RB1 is out with injury, being David Montgomery. But Damian Williams was in role and in line to have that RB1 role this week, but he was out with COVID. And he did test positive, which is important to know, which might keep him out another week. We'll have to monitor the situation, but if KHALIL Herbert's on your waiver wires, make sure to grab him because Damian Williams could miss another week, and KHALIL Herbert did look pretty solid in this offense that's been pretty horrible so far this year. Our fourth waiver wire out of the week comes from an injury that a lot of us dreaded. And with Antonio Gibson potentially worsening his shin injury, and he might need to be placed on IR at this point, that means J.D. McKissic, who by the way was the RB12 this week in PPR formats, is a top waiver wire ad. I'd be looking to spend 10 to 15% of my fab money on him, and maybe even more if I'm desperate for a running back right now. Our final waiver wire out of the week is Christian Kirk. Somehow this guy is still not rostered in some fantasy leagues, which is beyond me. But Cliff Kingsbury loves to spread the ball around to anybody willing to catch it. And Kirk is one of those players that it only takes one play for him to have a solid fantasy week. All you need is one deep ball, and he's fantasy relevant. And with Kyler Murray being one of the best deep ball throwers in the NFL, and Cliff Kingsbury refusing to throw the ball more than 5 times a game, it seems like, to DeAndre Hopkins, Kirk should be at a role that's going to stay pretty steady for the rest of the year. And you can pretty much lock him in as a low-end wide receiver 3 moving forward.